Plenty of narrative-focused games leave players with a sense of wanting more, either via their success in delivering a visceral world which gamers yearn to get more lost in, or maybe by their stories feeling incomplete in some way. Many of the games in this rundown feature deliberately open-ended conclusions. Of course, not every loose narrative thread needs to be tied up, but it's still fun to imagine what shape story DLC would take if it were indeed released. It goes without saying that there are spoilers for the games featured, so skip a section if you're wanting to experience a game's story firsthand. Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain is the 9th and final installment in Hideo Kojima's stealth action series Metal Gear Solid a meticulously crafted, misunderstood masterpiece, or a fragmentary, half-baked narrative devoid of resolution? For those who haven't played, spoiler warning, The Phantom Pain ends abruptly. There is a sense that its story is unfinished. Intriguingly, after release, unused textures, audio files, and gameplay features for an unused third chapter entitled Peace were discovered deep within the files of MGS5's PC version. More cut content in the form of a 51st mission cropped up on a bonus disc for the Phantom Pain's Collector's Edition. Whilst MGS5 wrapped up the story of Big Boss, there are still narrative threads untied, with character stories that kind of just fizzled out. It would have been well received by many were a story DLC released to resolve these loose threads, but with Kojima jumping ship from Konami, we'll have to make do with the admittedly still pretty fantastic game as it is. God of War Ragnarok. 2018's reboot did not receive any further story DLC, and it's not especially surprising to see Ragnarok's director ruling out extra story for last year's sequel either. Still, despite this, there's a subset of fans badgering Santa Monica Studio for further content, as to be fair, Ragnarok does have a fairly open-ended resolution. Kratos and his son Atreus go their separate ways, each with lives to lead and stories to tell. It'd be interesting, if we were to get story DLC, to see how Atreus builds a new life with Angrboda whilst Kratos attempts to rebuild the Nine Realms with Freya and Mimir. With the current setting seemingly over, we'll have to wait until the next game to discover the fates of our two characters. Disco Elysium. For all its compelling, engaging detective dramatics, discovering Disco Elysium's guilty party, the deserter encountered at the Sea Fortress at the game's end, feels sort of anticlimactic, almost like the prime suspect and thus the resolution to the case were given to you. There's a sense of abruptness. Our amnesiac cop Harry Dubois and sidekick Kim Kitsuragi are finally onto something great, something profound, and then the game just ends. Whether there's scope for lengthy story DLC is debatable, but the events immediately following the end of the case would certainly be welcome. The world of Disco Elysium keeps turning. At the very least, there's another story taking place in the same corner of war-ravaged Revachol, perhaps with characters our detectives meet along the way. Soma. Before development of Soma wrapped up, Studio Frictional Games did discuss amongst themselves the possibility of DLC. Ultimately, as Soma heavily relies on its philosophical meanderings working within an intricate game world, the team decided their ideas weren't up to scratch and abandoned any hope of releasing more story. It's a shame there won't be any expansion though, as there's scope to expand on what happens to the version of Simon left behind on Pathos 2. Also, perhaps events could have turned awry for Simon and Catherine on Ark since it drifted away from Earth. Better yet, the story could continue through the eyes of both these Simons, although it's probably best we don't see what happens to the Simon left alone at the bottom of the ocean. Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. FromSoft Shinobi Action Odyssey Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice is a more distilled, less is more experience than other games in their oeuvre. As such, unlike Bloodborne and Dark Souls preceding it, Sekiro did not receive any story DLC despite there being room to explore more narrative beats in its feudal Japanese setting. The fact is, From Software likely moved towards focusing their efforts on Elden Ring shortly after Sekiro's release. Otherwise, it's fair to assume the game's characters and world they exist in would have been expanded upon in subsequent story DLC. Deathloop. Whilst Deathloop's time-twisting narrative wasn't neatly sewn up come game's end, each of its multiple endings did satisfactorily tie the plot, leaving players content with protagonist Colt's fate. Plus, the nature of a Groundhog Day time loop story is that it doesn't easily lend itself to further expansion. Instead, in crafting a vibrant, richly detailed world with a host of colorful supporting characters, Arcane Lion could do well to drum up story DLC which further fleshes out the world of Black Reef Island. After all, they released DLC for Dishonored, which focus on other characters' perspectives. So it's not out of the question to assume Deathloop DLC could focus on the stories of the Visionaries as they try to halt Cult's attempts to break the loop. Stray. Stray's lovable feline odyssey, whereby a cat split from its family journeys to the surface of a buried walled city accompanied by a sentient drone companion, captured hearts and minds when it was released last year. Whilst the cat does eventually escape the dangerous city, we never get to see it reunite with its fellow felines. B12, the robot AI companion, may or may not have survived their self-sacrifice in freeing the cat too, so there's definitely scope for a compelling Stray story DLC which ties up these loose narrative threads. The Evil Within 2. Sebastian Castellanos, principal protagonist in The Evil Within and its sequel, arguably has his story done and dusted by the end of the second game. He's overcome his fears, learned the truth behind his wife's disappearance, and rescued his kidnapped daughter from STEM, with the sequel leaving him as he ventures forth for a new life. Except in a post-credits scene, we see the STEM system reawaken, yet it's unclear how or why. Not exactly a cliffhanger, but enough to whet the appetite of fans who, after this revelation, are understandably expectant for a story expansion. With Sebastian gone, perhaps Mobius double agent Julie Kidman could fill in the gaps, becoming player character as she did in the DLC for the first game. Night in the Woods. Night in the Woods has a definite ending. Open-ended and subject to interpretation, but an ending nonetheless. Fans seem divided on whether the title needs a follow-up, either via sequel or DLC. Sure, it'd be nice to spend more time with May as she overcomes her demons. Bia could continue running the pickaxe store while Scrag and Angus start a new life together out of town. But are these ideas strong enough to warrant deeper exploration? Maybe for a Night in the Woods expansion, a prequel could work. One which explores Casey's backstory or the events surrounding the downfall of Possum Springs, which led to the formation of the mind-dwelling cultists. To the Moon. Emotional psychological drama To the Moon has received a couple of loose story-adjacent DLCs since release. Both focus on the game's artificial memory service provider, the Sigmund Corporation, showcasing negative public perception surrounding the morality of such technology whilst adding deeper characterization to the game's two leading protagonists. The game's central story, one whereby doctors Rosaline and Watts work to fulfill dying man Johnny's last wish to visit the moon, has an ending laced with poignancy. The knowledge Johnny and his childhood sweetheart River could have had a more fulfilling life together is more than a little tragic. Johnny's false memories are successfully implanted, but it'd be nice to revisit these characters so River could be treated to the same outcome. And with that, we reach the end of this video. Have anything to say? Let us know in the comments below. Also, we upload new videos every single day on Gaming Bolt, so please consider subscribing as it really helps us out. Thanks for watching.